ExploreVM podcast. Last week, VMware announced the open sourcing of a couple of software development kits to help improve the developer experience. My guest today knows a thing or two about SDKs and so much more. Alan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey Paul, pleased to be here. My name is Alan Renouf. I am a senior product line manager at VMware, which basically means I'm in charge of a few things, and they're generally acronym based. So, my portfolio includes APIs, SDKs, and CLIs, mainly for vSphere, but I'm always interested in doing what's right for VMware and generally helping people out when it comes to automation and programmaticability, if that's a word, of the vSphere product range.
So the blog post that you put out last week called out two SDKs specifically for open sourcing. Why were they open sourced, and which ones were chosen?
Yeah, good question. So it's probably worth me talking about what an SDK is to VMware, because there seems to be various different definitions of what an SDK is online. If I go to look at Google's SDK or Apple's SDK or somebody else's SDK, they contain different things. So at VMware, generally what we mean when we say SDK is, you said software development kit, but what does that mean? To us, it means three things. It means you're able to find the documentation or download the documentation. It means you're able to find a language binding or some examples of how to use that. And then thirdly, it means the samples, and we put a lot of details into the samples there. So the combination of all of those three things together, packaged up, is what we call an SDK. And last week, you're right, we actually took some of our SDKs and we open sourced them, which generally means we made it easier for our developers to use these open source SDKs. Essentially, what we are trying to do is take away the pain of using our APIs and using our APIs with specific languages, and make it super easy for a developer to work with our product and our APIs to produce integration, to produce automation, and generally use the APIs that vSphere produce. So let me take you back a little bit in time and tell you about how we used to do this, and then I'll tell you about why what we're doing now makes sense. So what we used to do was we used to have our SDKs as a big zip file, and you used to have to go to the VMware site. Well, first of all, you had to find our SDKs, and there was a couple of ways to do that. Google wasn't always the best way to find it, because it would bring back about 6 different versions of our SDKs, and then you had to, go and find the version that you wanted, and then click through the links, and then go into the My VMware site, log in with your My VMware account if you have one. If you don't, you have to go and register it, and then you have to click on the download page, accept the EULA, and then you finally get to the point where you've downloaded the zip. Once you've extracted that zip, you have to look inside that zip, work out the folder structure that we've put in there, and read about 3 different documents to get to the point where you can import the language bindings into your specific code editor that you use, or work out how these samples actually work, and get to the point where you can achieve what you wanted to do, which is actually start programming against our APIs. So, that's what I call the developer experience. And to me, that was a pretty lousy developer experience. I asked a customer once, how long does it take you to get started with that developer experience? And they said, it literally took me 2 months to get to the point where I downloaded your SDKs, and I was at the point where I could confidently use your APIs and your samples. And really, 2 months is just laughable, So that's the kind of thing that I was trying to solve, because whilst we're doing really good stuff with our APIs, we're actually moving our APIs from SOAP to a REST-based infrastructure. We are making them very easy to use. It's not just about going from SOAP to REST, but it's also about making them very simplified as well, and giving people the more modern ways to work with the APIs, the more modern API models that they're used to when they're working with cloud providers, for example. So we're going to REST. We are also making it simpler, but it's also about making that developer experience simpler, like I said. Having to download it and sign into various different sites is not ideal. So, this is really part of that. By putting them in GitHub, first of all, we've made the download and the contribution so much easier. What you can now do is actually open up a terminal and just do a git clone of the actual repository and instantly have the SDK for your language downloaded. So the two SDKs that we actually open sourced were the REST SDK and the Python Sdk. So I'll start with the REST SDK. The REST SDK contains a couple of things. It first of all contains some Postman samples. So Postman is a fantastic application. It's an application that you can download off of the internet. It's free of charge, and you can use it to basically work with REST APIs. They really do a great job of allowing you to create collections and divide your API up into a couple of different areas, into different folders. So you can actually go through Postman, you can download this REST SDK, import the collection, and then within a couple of seconds, you're actually up and running with a very easy to use, product that's available online that simply talks to REST APIs. And there's a bunch of collections in there that get you started straight away. So for example, if you wanted to log in and get a list of virtual machines, that would be 2 clicks in the REST SDK. And it tells you exactly what it's doing under the covers. So it will tell you, I'm calling this API, I'm doing a get on /vcenter /rest/VM, and I'm listing the virtual machines for you. It will go through a number of different samples in there for working with things like virtual machines, working with clusters, data stores, folders, working with adding those virtual machines, working with being able to list those virtual machines, and also work with the hardware for those virtual machines as well. There's other areas that API covers along the appliance and the content library as well. So the REST SDK, like I said, contains 2 things. The first one I just explained was the Postman samples. The second one is some JavaScript samples, which you can easily download and get running inside of your web server using something like Node, for example, and again, be up and running within a couple of minutes. So, the main thing we're trying to solve by open sourcing these samples is giving people the ability to, first of all, download this stuff and get up and running within a couple of minutes and not a couple of months. And then secondly, make it easier and make it more modern as well. Fit into those workflows and those tooling that developers use nowadays to actually be able to use our APIs.
And that was quite a bit of information about the REST APIs.
Yeah.
What about the other SDK that was open sourced?
Yeah, so good point. The other SDK was the Python Sdk. So the Python Sdk, again, includes the documentation, the samples, and the language bindings to allow you to use it with Python. And we've gone into a great deal of detail with the samples that we've produced with the Python Sdk. So you're able to, again, download those SDKs within a couple of seconds using the same GitHub methods and instantly read the Python documentation. That makes it super easy to use, or actually import those samples and start using those samples. The samples are fantastic because it takes you from basically having nothing all the way to uploading an ISO into the data store, deploying a VM, setting up your data center, setting up your cluster. It really does take you through an entire workflow, and also breaks that down into various different samples that you can easily copy and paste into your own products and your own integration using Python.
You gave us a little bit of detail on what's in these APIs. What can developers do with them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I did tell you a little bit about what's in there, but these APIs are new in 6.5, and there's a lot of great things that you can do with these APIs now. Some of the stuff that we've gone back and done and released over these REST APIs in this new simplified way is being able to work with things like clusters, being able to get a list of your clusters, get a list of your data centers, be able to create a data center, get more information on your data centers, being able to get basic information about data stores, folders, hosts, and some basic inventory stuff as well. And then also the network and resource pools. And then where we focused a lot of our time is actually making the VM lifecycle a lot easier to use and a lot more full featured as well. So being able to create a virtual machine, for example, before, if you were creating a virtual machine in our old SOAP API, it would take around 220 lines of code to do that. It was really complicated. And that's kind of our hello world, when people want to use our VM, the vSphere APIs, one of the first things they want to do is clearly create a virtual machine. So we've simplified that entire process now. Not only is it a more modern REST-based JSON input API, but you can actually create a virtual machine with 10 lines of code for a very simple virtual machine. Or you can make that more complex. You can kind of build on it and include the information that you want. So if I wanted to include the name and the CD-ROM information and the new hard disk and not actually rely on the defaults of Virtual Center, then I could actually go and do that. We've extended the hardware side of things as well. So being able to work with the hardware, whether it's the adapters, the hardware adapters, whether it's the CD-ROM drives, the CPUs, the disks, the memory, being able to work with those and specify that information using this API is now very simple. There is CRUD operations for each of these devices and working with these entries. Coming away from vCenter a little bit, the Appliance API was brand new in 6.5 and is fully covered through these REST APIs and all the interfaces and SDKs that we've released. So being able to work with the appliance itself, clearly when Virtual Center was on Windows, you had the Windows operating system to be able to log into and do things like stop and start services or set the TCP IP addresses or work with things like syslog and NTP. Now it's an appliance-based Virtual Center. You're not able to do that easily unless it's from the UI. So these APIs were really put there for you to be able to manage the vCenter server appliance itself. So you can, for example, go in there and work with things like access to the actual VCSA. You can turn things on and off like the DCUI or SSH or the shell or the console CLI. You can get some health information. You can go in there and check the health of your appliance, make sure things like the database storage are okay, or the load's okay, the memory's okay, the storage is okay, the monitoring is all okay. You can go in there as well and work with things like the NTP server, as I mentioned. You can work with the local accounts that are on there. You can even do a backup and restore of that appliance as well. This is also something that was new and added into the 6.5 version of the VCSA. So you can work with Virtual Center, you can work with the appliance. Also part of this API is tagging as well. So tagging was one of those new features that was brought out in vSphere 5.5, I want to say, maybe 6.0. But it is one of those features that now you can access the entire API for again. So you can go in and tag things like your virtual machines or your data stores or your hosts using the vSphere tagging system and automating that entire process using these APIs. These were enhanced in 6.5 to allow you to actually use multiple objects to tag as well. So I can say tag all of these virtual machines with this single tag using one API call. And finally, last but not least, is the content library as well. This is one of those great new features that was introduced in 6.0 and is now fully accessible through the REST API again. So you're able to work with the content libraries, whether that's creating a new content library, adding new entries into the content library, or new OVFs or new virtual machines or new objects into that content library, being able to sync that content library to another content library, or work with that entire content library and deploy items from that content library is all available through this REST API. So you can see that we've added a lot of entries into this API. And as I said, there's going to be a lot more added in the future as well. If there's stuff missing there, I'm definitely interested in you contacting me and telling me what you want to see next.
So this afternoon, I reached out to the VMware community, a lot of the vExperts, and threw it out on Twitter that I'd be discussing this with you, and if anyone had any questions. So one of the first questions that came in was why open source only some of the SDKs?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. My objective is to ultimately open source all of the SDKs that we have. But clearly we have to start somewhere. So REST and Python were a good place to start. The REST API that we have is very complete. The Python SDK that we have is very complete. So open sourcing these and actually getting used to working in that open source environment, not only externally, but also internally as well. Making sure that we are providing the level of support that is needed with a GitHub repository. That clearly changes when we move models. Before, when you used to download a zip, there was no way for you to provide feedback to us really, or if it was you had to find us first of all, and then you had to maybe log a support call. Using this new method, you're actually able to go to the GitHub repository and raise an issue. If there's not a sample that you want that's not in there, then it's very easy to go to the GitHub repository, log in, and say, hey, I was wondering, has anybody created this sample for this SDK? Clearly, we're not there to write all of the samples for everybody. We're not a free development resource for your entire, your entire company. But we are hoping that the community is going to be able to feed back in there as well. The great thing about this being in GitHub is that we're able to accept community responses. So being able to ask the community for help and give them the place that they can actually say, hey, you know what? I created a VM in a different way than what you created it, and I'm going to upload it into the GitHub repository and make it available to everybody else as well. One of the things I always say when I present my sessions is, there's no such thing as stealing code, it's sharing code. So we should all make sure that the samples that we write are uploaded back into the GitHub repositories and made available to other people. And I kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent there and started to answer your question. But yeah, so we do definitely have plans to open source our other SDKs as well. These two were just a good starting point for us to be able to release them and get used to working with that community from both sides of the fence. Make sure that we're giving you the support that you need, and also that you're able to see what we're doing here. And if we need to make any slight alterations to the way that we've open sourced them, the way that we provide the GitHub repositories, then we're definitely open to hear that feedback so that we can perfect this in the future.
And actually, your little tangent is a perfect segue to the next community question that I received. And that is, now that these SDKs have been open sourced, where do you see the free and open source community taking them in the next few years?
Yeah, that's a great question. Clearly the reason we're open sourcing these is to make it easier for people to develop against our product and develop against our APIs. So the kind of things that I'm looking forward to seeing are the community coming together and actually telling us what samples we're missing, even what APIs we're missing. This is a great way for us to receive feedback about the way that people use our APIs and what we're missing from our APIs. Sometimes we want to make our APIs a lot easier for people to use, but we don't know how. We don't know what people want from our APIs to include in a single API call or to break out into multiple API calls. So this is a great way for us to get that feedback, to interact with the community and really have that one-on-one relationship with the product. So where I see this going in the future is, not only a number of different samples, but improved APIs for the vSphere product range, and also more integrations into other products as well. I've already had, since we released them earlier last week, I've already had a number of different third parties reach out to me and say, this is going to be so much easier for us to work with you now because we don't have to sign up to some developer community and pay you guys money to be a partner. And, we can literally pick your SDK up and start writing the integration with our product. So hopefully you're going to see a lot more of the modern day products integrating with what we're doing here with vSphere as well.
So with the added collaboration of going open source with these SDKs, what do you know of VMware's vision of what can be achieved, or what do you already see people working on at VMware that's going to start to crystallize in the next 1, 3, or 5 years?
Yeah, clearly APIs are taking over the world right now. I mean, there used to be a day when the only people that knew about APIs were these developers with their, cardigans on and their sandals and and their beards. And I'm totally stereotyping here. And if there's any developers, please ignore what I just said. But these guys were shut into a room and said, create a UI for this product, or create some integration from our product to their product. That's no longer the case. APIs are ruling the world. Everybody needs to know how to use APIs, whether it's the developers, whether it's the new breed of DevOps guys, or whether it's the traditional vSphere admin. I constantly have people say, how do I automate this? And 9 times out of 10, to automate something, you need an API. So guess what? There's vSphere admins and sysadmins that want to know how these APIs work. And that's why we're making them as simple as possible. So from, the internal side, what I can see happening is clearly more and more APIs coming out in this format using the vSphere API and making them as simple as possible. So more and more products coming out with these as well from VMware using these APIs. And then externally, clearly the integration, as I said, I can see more and more integration happening with these. And then one of the other things that I see happening in the future as well is the fact that these APIs are no longer just relevant in your own data center. VMware announced the fact that we are doing a huge partnership with Amazon and AWS right now. So essentially, these APIs that exist in your data center will also exist in Amazon as well. So any integration work that's being done by partners or being done by yourselves or being done by developers at your company are going to not only work against your on-premises data center, but also work against your data center in AWS if you choose to take that route.
So in the blog post last week, you stated that more SDKs are planned to follow in the near future. Are you allowed to talk about which ones you're working on, or just kind of give us a ballpark on how soon we should keep our eyes open for that? Or is there anything really that can be shared at this point?
Yeah, I can't mention timeframes because legal get upset with me if I do things like that. But, we're definitely looking at open sourcing the SDKs that make sense. If there's something that your listeners or yourself wants to raise in our priority, then please do let me know. I'll give my details out at the end of this podcast. Please do feel free to contact me with this information, or hit me up on Slack or any other of the methods that we mentioned. But if you look at the VMware code site, which is on code.vmware.com, and you click on the SDKs icon, you can see a list of our SDKs that exist there at the moment, and you can actually see the vSphere SDK, automation SDKs, including the ones that we've just open sourced. So, clearly the ones that we want to open source next are the ones that are on that list for the vSphere automation SDK. And again, the order we have is based upon feedback that I receive from customers and popularity of the SDKs that they use. So we'll be looking at them from that point of view. And anybody that wants to contact me and weigh in on that is definitely welcome.
So another community question we got was from one Josh Atwell. He would like to know what liquor goes well with these APIs and SDKs.
You gotta love Josh.
Right.
Clearly, I never advise for people to develop and drive. It's not good. You should always wear a seatbelt. But that's a great question. It does come down to what you prefer. I think we know what Josh prefers. There's several pictures I've seen of him on the internet of him next to it, an open tequila bottle that's empty. So, for Josh, I would certainly go with the tequila route. Personally, once I've drank tequila, my code kind of gets a little bit blurry, and some might say that that's a good thing, but there's definitely things that these developers like to do when they code. Drinking is maybe not one of them. Listening to music is one of the more popular ones I hear.
So with these APIs, are there any CLIs that work with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So the great thing about these SDKs is they're just one way to access our APIs. There's a number of different ways that you can use to access these vSphere automation APIs that we bought out recently. So the first one is, clearly PowerCLI. We hear from our customers and from vSphere admins that they love PowerCLI. I'm used to be the PowerCLI PM. I'm still very heavily involved in PowerCLI right now. I recently handed that over a couple of weeks ago to Jake Robinson, who is going to make a fantastic PowerCLI PM. But clearly that used to be my baby, and I'm still keeping a close eye on what's going on there. PowerCLI, that you can access everything that's in these SDKs and in the REST API. You can use to access PowerCLI. So there is a connect CIS server commandlet, and a get CIS service commandlet. And that accesses the entire REST API and gives you access to work with everything that's in there through PowerCLI. And there's also some of the more high-level commandlets, the commandlets that you're used to. So when I say high-level commandlets, I mean things like get VM rather than, using the entire API, and that being a little bit harder. But things like the content library commandlets, for example, are based on these APIs underneath. So you'll see more and more features coming out from us and PowerCLI commandlets using these APIs in the future. William Lamb has also written some great functions that allow you to access the Appliance API that's part of these APIs. And you can go in there and take a look at his blog, virtuallyghetto.com. He's got a great blog post that tells you how to get started. And then he's also started writing a bunch of functions that he's again put into our PowerCLI examples open source repository so that anybody can download and contribute to as well. As well as PowerCLI, we also make these available through something called DCLI. And DCLI stands for Data Center CLI. And this is one of our newer CLIs as well. So the reason behind this CLI is the fact that, the Linux and the Mac guys always used to say, well, PowerCLI is great, but I need to spin up a Windows box to access that. And whilst that's somewhat changed recently with Microsoft open sourcing PowerShell and also us making PowerCLI available on the Mac and Linux, we're still catching up with that environment. So DCLI is more of a simplified CLI that's available on the Mac and available on Linux, and also comes shipped with the vCenter server appliance and also the Windows Virtual Center. And it's really a great CLI that has a really nice interactive way to work with it. So I can literally launch DCLI, connect to my Virtual Center server, and not even know how to automate something using it. I can jump in there and I can type something like VM, hit space, and it will have a drop-down menu of the type of tasks that I can do with a virtual machine. So I can go to list, for example, and then hit space again, and it will tell you how you can filter that list commandlet to only show the powered-on virtual machines, for example, or virtual machines with a certain name, or in a certain host, or in a certain data center. And then you can continue through this, and as soon as you hit enter, it will bring back the results, and you'll know exactly how to run that command in the future, or run it in the standalone version of DCLI. So it's meant for people that have been woken up at 4 a.m. in the morning. They've logged into their work because their virtual center's down, or they have a task to perform, and they're kind of still half asleep. So it really does guide you through every step of the the interface and takes you through fixing that problem, whether it's changing the network in your appliance or adding an NTP server, stopping and starting services, creating virtual machines, deleting virtual machines, powering on, powering off, all those kind of things. Basically, everything that's in that API, that's in the Python SDK, that's in our documentation, is surfaced up through DCLI and also PowerCLI. So one of the other things I should mention as well is it's not just about the CLIs. We also have this great API Explorer that's now available to you in vCenter and that was shipped as part of vSphere 6.5. So now, if I go to the vSphere homepage that you can get to when you hit in the IP of your virtual center, there's a link on the right-hand side that says, click here to get started with the vSphere REST APIs. Or you can go to your vCenter IP address /API Explorer, and that will give you a new web-based API Explorer that allows you to instantaneously list all of the APIs that are in there. You can even log in there and use those APIs as well. If you've got a small task or you're just learning how to use these APIs, it's a very nice way for you to go in there and learn how to use these.
So for our final community question, because everyone's at a different point in their career and their automation journey and their development journey, our last question is, what is your preferred starting point for a VMware admin new to PowerCLI? If someone asked, where do I start, what would you say?
Yeah, that's a great question. PowerCLI is one of those things that's been around for a while now. So there's definitely a lot of learning resources out there, and it really does depend on your learning style. If you're the kind of person that wants to sit there in bed and read a book, then there's definitely a lot of books out there. There's Getting Started books, a great one that was just released by Robert in the Netherlands. I won't even begin to pronounce his last name because I know I will butcher it. But if you, if you go to the vSphere blog, there's an article that was just a blog article that was just, the PowerCLI blog. There was a blog article that was just released on there that highlights this book and what was in there. And on the right-hand side, there's also a link to that book. It's definitely worth checking out. There's more advanced books out there as well. One of the books that I wrote with Luke Deakins and Glenn Sizemore and a number of the other community members that are out there actually gives you concrete examples of how you can perform certain things in your vSphere environment and actually walks you through those examples as well. The communities is also a great place to start as well. There's no such thing as a bad question. So everybody on there is super helpful. Again, they're not there to write your scripts for you. So I'm sure they would prefer you to go in there and ask a question where it at least looks like you've tried to do this. But having said that, Luke Deakins is a machine and he literally answers questions on that communities within a couple of seconds. And I have seen him write scripts for people numerous times. So, the communities is a great place to get started, even if it's just looking through the previous posts that are on there, which I clearly suggest you do before you raise the question. And then the one that I like doing, I'm more of a person who wants to sit down and get my hands dirty. So what I like to do is actually use the hands-on labs that VMware created. And again, if you go to the PowerCLI blog, on the right-hand side, there's a blue screen with icon with a link to the hands-on lab for PowerCLI. And what you can do there is click on that and it'll automatically launch a PowerCLI environment and a vSphere environment with vRealize operations in there as well. So you can go through the manual that it gives you and it will walk you through learning PowerCLI step by step, all the way from the start. Or if you're more of an advanced person, it will take you through some more advanced stuff as well, teaching you PowerCLI. Or the other thing I like to do is literally launch that and not even use the manual. Just go off on my own. Start typing scripts. Start using it to test my scripts out, to work out how I would write a script, and then use that information back in my environment as I need to. I'm more of a hands-on person, so I find that kind of learning a lot easier than I would a book where I have to read something and then remember where it was, what page it was, go back and reference that and copy the stuff out into a new place. There's also some Train Signal. Are they still called Train Signal? I think they've got a new name now,
No,
right?
they're a plural site, I
Plural
believe.
site. That was right. So there's great plural site video on there as well, where you can clearly put that in one screen and follow along in your own environment on the other one as well. That's also a great way to learn. So there's literally numerous ways to learn PowerCLI out there now, that you can pick up depending on your learning cycles and do that. I always used to do it in my lunch break. So the way I learned PowerCLI was to literally open up a shell in my lunch break while I was eating my sandwich and start typing a few commands. Start with the get commands. You're not going to trash anything in your environment using a get, because that literally just retrieves the information and prints it out onto the screen. And then start working how that pipelines into some of the other commandlets that allow you to, say, for example, export a CSV or output it into a HTML document or even send an email. And then once you've mastered that, move on to the set commandlets or the new commandlets to start creating stuff or changing stuff.
So we've reached the end of the list of the questions from the community. Is there anything else you'd like to add on any of the topics we've touched today?
Yeah, one of the other things I realized I missed out while we were talking is the fact that we also have vRealize orchestrator workflows that allow you to use everything in this automation SDK as well. So you could actually download the plugin for VAPI, it's known as, and you can again access in the 100% of what's in our API, but through vRealize orchestrator. The idea and kind of closing statement I want to give you about what we're doing here is I'm trying to solve the developer experience. From my point of view, I don't care how you access my APIs. I want to give you the tools to do your job, whether that's Python, whether that's Java, whether that's Ruby, whether that's purely a REST API, whether that's the CLIs for the vSphere admins or some of the sysadmins or even operations guys out there, or whether that's VRO or any other way. If there's a way we don't cover our SDKs at the moment, then let me know what that is, because I want to give you the ability to automate your entire environment and integrate with our environment using what makes sense for you.
One final thought from myself would be my coworkers would be mad if I didn't say thank you for vCheck. Several of us use it quite regularly. It's a great tool, so thank you for that contribution to the community.
You're welcome.
So all blog and Twitter links will be posted with the podcast today, but where can people reach you, those who aren't on the website listening to the podcast?
Yeah, again, I'll give you multiple ways to reach me. So if you're a Twitterite, you can tweet me on Alan Renouf, all one word, and my last name is spelled Renouf. You can email me if you like. I'm not shy about giving my public email address out. Clearly I want people to contact me and give me their feedback. Again, I'm not there to write your scripts, so don't send me an email asking me to write a script. But my email is renoufa@vmware.com. That's renoufa@vmware.com. Please do feel free to reach out to me. Let me know what APIs you want, what SDKs you want, and any code samples you want as well. So I'll make sure I give that to the development team that supports me and does a great job producing this stuff. I have a personal blog, which, to be honest with you, I find very hard to keep updated at the moment, purely because of the amount of work that I have on. But, there is some useful information that I did way back when, and you can find that at virtual.net. That's virtu-al.net.
All right. Well, once again, thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Paul. It's been great talking to you.
And thank you to my listeners. Community involvement is a great way to have your opinions heard and help inspire changes. If you'd like to be a guest on the ExploreVM podcast or to continue the conversation on APIs, SDKs, and more, reach out to me on Twitter at ExploreVM or email me at paul@explorevm.com. Once again, thank you for listening to the ExploreVM podcast.